What does it take for a person to be noble?
Nobility is a status that's achieved on the far side of sacrifice. Men who are brave are willing to fight to achieve their objective. However, men who are noble are willing to sacrifice themselves to achieve it. They're willing to lose personally so that others can gain.
Welcome to the King Culture Podcast, where we are equipping men to become selfless leaders. I'm Yvette Broughton.
And I'm Dominic Purviance.
And we're your hosts. All right, Don, so we are back with another episode of the King Culture Podcast, and today we're talking about nobility, which is a word that, you don't really use too often in modern times. But when we say selfless leaders must be noble, what do we mean?
Well, when I think of the word noble, you think of individuals that achieve some level of respect and some level of honor that's based on their character. We talked in our very first episode, we talked about dignity. And dignity is something that is inherent, like every human being has dignity. But something like nobility is something that isn't inherent. It's something that you have, it's the byproduct of a well-lived life of a man or woman that lives by character. And it's their character that makes them noble. It's how they handle challenges and how they handle conflict and how they deal with life. They deal with it in such a way that when people look at them, they admire them. And it also gives them a certain level of influence that you can't gain by your title or your position.
Right.
Like noble people, just because of how they live and how they carry themselves and what they're willing to do for the benefit of other people, give them a certain level of influence and credibility. They just don't say what they believe. They're willing to live it, and they're willing to live it not when it's easy, but when it's hard and when it's difficult. And if there's one word, one trait and habit that really separates noble men from just regular men, it's the willingness to sacrifice. There's certain things that we talked about bravery in the last episode. There's certain things that don't change in your world and in culture without you being willing to take risk and be brave. But then the next step above that is being willing to sacrifice. Because bravery just means that, I'm willing to fight for what I believe in, and I can get in the arena, and there's a possibility that I can win. When you're noble, it means you are making a sacrifice knowing that you're going to lose. I know I'm going to lose, but by me losing, it's going to cause somebody else to win. And I'm willing to make that sacrifice. I don't get anything out of it. I don't get any accolades. I don't get any awards. I don't get any praise for it. But I know that if I lose, then the generation that comes after me, or the people that I really love and the people that I really care about, are going to win and benefit. That's what makes a man noble. And that level of, this is, to me, when we talk about selfless leadership, this is the apex of selfless leadership. It is the final test that a man has to pass in order to be a selfless leader. It's his willingness to sacrifice, going into a situation, knowing that I'm not going to get anything out of this. And I really learned this. I had a friend a few years ago. We were talking, and he just had his, I think they just had, him and his wife just had a baby girl.
Okay.
And kids, when they're born, they really do a few things. They cry.
They sleep.
They eat, and they poop.
Yeah,
and that's
pretty much it. Yeah.
And he said to me, like, I don't get anything out of this. Like, what am I getting out of, like, I clean up poop, and I don't, this is, to give him some credit, baby was just
baby
born.
number one.
First baby, he wasn't sleeping through the night.
Yeah.
So, and I think if I talk to him now, I know he will say, look, the benefit
Far
is,
outweighed the
yeah, and it's
drama.
yeah, and
Not
the benefit is not so much what the child can do for me. The benefit is seeing the investment that you make in that child
Yeah.
produce dividends far off in the future. And so a noble man has to have this investment mindset. I know, okay, I am sacrificing today in
Yeah.
order to produce something tomorrow, something that I may not even get to see in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And it doesn't benefit me directly, but it benefits the people that I
That are
love.
kind of coming. Yeah. Yeah. It makes you think about, just you saying, that makes me think of like Dr. King, right?
Yeah.
The famous, I may not get there with you type
Yeah,
of
yeah.
thing, right? Like that was a very noble thing to say. Like, I know, whether he had a premonition or whatever, I may not get there with you. I was like, I expect not to get there with
Yeah.
you. Really, I feel like is what he was actually saying. Like, I don't think I'm going to make it,
Yeah.
but you've got to go forward. And I think one of the things that you talk about in the book are like the three things that sort of mark like a nobleman. And one of those I think is like this is foresight, right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what those three things are that a noble man has to have as he kind of moves forward
Well,
in his journey.
it's foresight, insight, and hindsight, and those are just three types of wisdom. It's the wisdom that you have before you go into a situation, the wisdom that you gain when you're in it, and the wisdom that you have when you're out of it and you're able to look back. And the reason why, you ever think about your father or your grandfather and these men that just possess this wisdom, and you can sit at their feet and you
Yeah.
can just learn from them.
Yeah.
And it's not a book knowledge.
It's
a
a lived
knowledge.
knowledge, yeah.
I've been through it.
Yeah.
And they have this ability to see with a level of clarity that normal people don't have.
Yeah.
And so when you are willing to sacrifice, you are no longer part of the equation. Like, it's not about you anymore. And when you are not a part of the equation, it's like if I'm trying to look at something and there's something blocking me, I can't see it with a level of clarity. When I remove it, there's a greater sense of clarity. And so when you move yourself out of the way,
Yeah.
when it's no longer about you, you're able to see the world differently, and you're able to make different kind of decisions. Like the man who's willing, you mentioned Dr. King. I think of King, I also think of Mandela. Mandela, right before he went to prison, he gives this famous speech, and he was like, I've fought for democracy, and he was a fighter. He showed bravery, but there's this last statement he said right before he went to prison. He said, "I fought for a democratic South Africa. It's something that I hope to see, but if needs be, I'm willing to die for it." Like when you get to a point where, I'm willing to die
For something
for this,
like really, yeah.
you see the world completely differently.
Yeah.
You make decisions differently.
Yeah.
You have a certain level of wisdom and clarity that normal people don't have. And so that's why when you sit in the room with a guy who puts his life on the line for either his family or his kids or his cause, he's able to impart a level of wisdom that has clarity because he's not in the way anymore.
Yeah.
He is not, his selfishness isn't blinding him and preventing him from seeing the situation with a level of wisdom and clarity that's necessary to really create transformational change.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like this whole when he's not in the way, like that really stands out to me in terms of like what you're saying about a man that's willing to sacrifice to the point of I'm not in the way. And this clarity, it's almost like they know what's valuable, like what's truly valuable. You think about, in the book, like, who was it, Solomon, like vanity, vanity, all of life is vanity, right? And so you get to this point of, man, I actually know what life is about or what matters, and whether it's my relationships or what have you. And this, whenever, I'm sure as we've been talking, even people who are listening, you can think of who are the noblemen in your life, or who are people that you recognize and say, man, I know someone like that who's extremely selfless, who's extremely, sacrificial. So like for me, I lost my dad a few years ago, and whenever I think of someone who's noble, I always think of my dad. Because of this, I'm no longer in the way, right? And I feel like I witnessed that all of my life, like just being a husband and a father, this willingness to like put other things aside, and do the hard things, and make the sacrifices and not complain about it, like, and never feel like, there's some debt that you owe. But when you're around a man like that, you feel indebted in a way, right? Like, not like you, in terms of you want to be noble as well. You want to work that hard. You want to be as sacrificial. Like, you almost owe it to them to model the same type of nobility. So I think that's an interesting, I don't know, the culture that a noble man kind of creates around himself is that everybody around him like levels up, like kind of comes up a level.
Yeah, he has a level of influence that is beyond his position.
Yeah.
Like, because you look at him, you know what it cost him.
Yeah.
You know what he's willing to sacrifice. You know the consistency that he's willing to sacrifice. And he's not asking for any credit. He's not looking for any accolades, and he's not looking for you to give him any prize or reward.
Nope.
He does it simply because it's the right thing to do. And those kind of men mark you.
That's a fact.
They have a level of influence that goes beyond any other position or title that you can give them, because their life marks you.
Yeah.
Their words have weight. Their words have greater credibility.
Yeah.
And you're willing to follow them.
You are.
And think about a king. A king famously said that if a man hasn't found something he's willing to die for, he's not fit to live.
Yeah.
Dr. King proved that he was willing to die for what he believed in. And he made a mark that lasts for generations after him.
Yeah, we're still
like this. We're still trying to live up to the mark and sacrifice that he made. But those kind of men, because they're willing to make that sacrifice, their legacy lasts far beyond them. Their influence goes beyond their time on this planet. Yeah. And we benefit from them even years and years after they're gone. And so if we're going to have that kind of influence as men, like, I think about your dad, he marked your life to the point that the lives of people that you mark and the lives of people that they mark
is tied
to
him.
And they will never know. They will never know him. They will never know what he did. They will never know the wisdom. But because he made a mark on you, it's going to impact everyone else that you impact. And so, I think that level of influence only comes when you're willing to get out the way. Yeah. You're willing to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, and I think that that's so key, even when we look at, like, what does that have to do, like, today, right? Like, in our modern context, is that we often use the big names like Mandela and King, but then there was Horace Broughton, right? Like, there are names that other people may not know, even the men that are listening to this, right? Like, you get to be noble in your own life, like to the depth that you are sacrificing for your family and you're doing the hard things. It doesn't have to come at the end of your life, even, because it's a day by day by day. It's a life value, I think, that you're living.
When it comes to responsibility, I feel the most responsible for myself. I think it's very important to take care of myself, therefore I can take care of others. So naturally I feel like I'm responsible for my family, but I know that if I don't take care of myself and my own mental well-being, then it's a challenge for me to take care of my family, and that's when the issues arise.
So if you're a young man, you may be a very young man, right? Like, maybe we've got some 70-year-old men who are listening to this. But even when King made that statement, he wasn't 70, he was 38, 39 years old. Exactly. So nobility is something that can be practiced right now today, or something that can be cultivated, I guess, right? Like this idea of sacrifice. So what do men need to know right now where they stand if they're listening to this and saying, man, I want, I remember at my dad's funeral, I said to my younger male cousins, I was like, live your life so that when your children have to stand up here, they can say about you what I'm saying about him. Do you know what I mean? Like, because they're paying attention and they're watching your sacrifice and what you're doing. And all of them are like in their late 20s, early 30s. So I think that, there is space. But what would you say to young men who are listening?
I don't think it could be said any better than that. I think it is, if nobility is the crown, live each day as if when you pass, you would want someone to say about you while they're looking over your casket that this was a noble man.
That's right. Here lies a king. That's right.
Here lies a king. And part of my fantasy when I think about the myself being noble is, and it kind of ended my life. I want to be able to be in a room where people are saying some of the things that I wrote, or living some of the principles and the ideas that I put out in the world, and not know where it came from, and not know it was me that wrote it.
Like, where do we get that from?
Yeah, where do you get men are supposed to be noble from? And I could just sit back and know just in my heart that this was something that God gave me, and I was willing to make the investment. That, to me, that embodies what the end of a noble life is. You're seeing the benefit of what you've invested into other people flourish in their lives. And not necessarily, you don't get any reward or accolades from it. You just see the fruit, and you know that when you pass from this world, that you will live eternally through the next generation because you've made the investment. And that's not something you wait to the end of your life to get to. You make every day you make a decision that I'm going to live my life as if when I get to the end and when I'm in that casket, that people can say, here lies a noble man.
Here lies a noble man.
And that's just, it's the small sacrifices every day. You make a point and you make a habit of being willing to sacrifice, to give of yourself for the benefit of somebody else every day, and not get any accolades and not get any rewards for it. And over your lifetime, people will be able to look back at you and say, man, that was a noble man.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. And so as we kind of wrap up this episode, we're looking at, like, what are some of those key takeaways? Is that noble men lead by sacrifice. They lead by sacrifice and moving themselves out of the way in order to get it done. And that your greatest level of influence doesn't come from your position, but from sort of your willingness to sacrifice. And I think, too, a third takeaway is just that you start today. And I think you don't know when the end of your life is going to be. It doesn't have to be way off in the future. I think about like a Nipsey Hussle who wasn't with us very, very long, but had an impact, right? Like, who made sacrifice in his community. And now people are looking towards that example. So you can be in the practice of self-sacrifice and being a selfless leader today. So we just want to say thank you for joining us for this episode of the King Culture Podcast. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard, we want you to just like and subscribe, comment, share, tell other people about it, and join us next time on the King Culture Podcast.
Thank you.